I know you.
Welcome to this episode of Tales of the Alleghenies, titled The Stauffer Murder. Ever since the biblical account of Cain committing the first murder, rampant and ruthless bloodshed has resonated through world history. The voice of the slain cry from the ground, as in the murder of Catherine Stauffer in 1906. Hot off the newspaper press, headlines heralded a killing. Murder mystery novels illuminated death by a crafty pen. And then the coming of radio transmitted chills up your spine from the screaming voice of a victim. And then television, bringing not only sound, but the very defiant actions of a sinister killer and a pleading victim into your living room. Why does mankind have such an inclination to be entertained by murder? I'm not here to give you an answer to that question, but to entertain you with another murder mystery. The story unfolds in Stonycreek Township, Somerset County, Pennsylvania, in what was locally called the Stauffer Bottom, a little over a mile from Lambertsville. The Stauffer farm contains over 200 acres, nestled in a beautiful valley that is drained by Lambert's Run. William Stauffer was deeded the property from his parents in 1858. He was adventurous, being successful in the Great California Gold Rush, and served as a sergeant in the American Civil War. He was also industrious, building a water-powered sawmill on Lambert's Run and a brickworks, all of which provided material to build a spacious and beautiful finished two-story brick residence with a main and back staircase. The property included a 90-foot bank barn and many outbuildings, an orchard of over 50 fruit trees, and tilled fields provided for their needs. Mr. Stauffer was married to Mary Elizabeth Ackerman, and to this union they had 3 sons. Mary died in 1870. William would marry again in 1872 to Catherine Reese Fickus, a widow. Together they would have 3 daughters, Annie Allman, Kate Miller, and Sadie Berkeybough. After Mr. Stauffer's death in 1903, Catherine Stauffer, his second wife, lived an almost isolated existence on this lonely farm except for the company of her 2 grandchildren, Grace and John Allman, aged respectively 14 and 12. They were the children of Annie Allman, who was either separated or divorced from her husband. It was early morning, Friday, November the 9th. Shortly after the midnight hour came the culminating horror. The 64-year-old Catherine Stauffer was foully murdered in her bed by an assassin whose identity yet remains shrouded in what appears to be an impenetrable mystery. The fiendish murderer gained entrance to the house through a second-story window by a ladder taken from a nearby shed. This photo was taken for evidence by Johnstown photographer Robert Bauman shortly after the killing. A pointed pine stick was found where the intruder pried open the bottom sash of the window far enough to place a small board under the sash that worked as a lever to open the window higher. The killer apparently used his pocket knife to cut the window blind level with the bottom of the upper sash. Stepping through the open window, he left an exact impression of his shoe on the cut window blind that had fallen on the floor. Creeping through the house, the killer next attempted to chloroform the granddaughter, Grace Allman. Grace said she awoke to something wet against her face. She was in a stupor, seeing what she thought was a man in her bedroom. She screamed. The villain choked her severely and she fainted. For some reason, the man ran downstairs. Grace, pulling herself together, ran into her brother's room. John grabbed his revolver as the two siblings raced into their grandmother's room, calling to her that a robber was in the house. Hearing the man coming up the main staircase, the grandchildren fled down the back stairs. John, who was only 12 years old, said he was too scared to confront the intruder with his pistol. The man had entered Mrs. Stauffer's bedroom with a lamp. Grace said she heard her grandmother say, "I know you." As the two children made their escape in their bare feet, they ran about 3/4 of a mile to the neighboring farm of William Spangler. William Spangler, his son John, along with neighbor Noah Boyce, armed themselves. Arriving at the Stauffer house, John Spangler was stationed at the front door, Mr. Boyce at the back door, and William Spangler entered the house alone. Remember, it was 1906 and electricity was in its infancy, so there were no lights to turn on, except by kerosene lantern or lamp. He searched the entire house. Upon entering Mrs. Stauffer's bedroom, he found the vulnerable lady lying in her bed, quiet in death. Apparently, when hearing all the commotion in the house, Catherine pulled herself up in a sitting position to gather her thoughts, just as the heartless assassin lunged towards her. The murderer grasped her throat tightly, leaving lasting bruise marks upon her neck, then wielded a blacksmith hammer, striking her 4 inches above the right ear, crushing her skull, from which her lifeblood flowed upon her bedclothes. The victim's bloody right hand was rested over her bosom, and her left arm reposed straight along her side. A horrifying sight for neighbors to witness. The callous murderer, of course, had fled. Coroner Dr. Lowther of Somerset deputized Justice of the Peace Jonathan Lambert of Lambertsville by telephone to conduct an inquest along with Dr. Clarence Friedline of Stoystown, who conducted the post-mortem examination. Sunday, November the 11th, an overcapacity crowd attended the funeral service of Catherine Stauffer at the Lambertsville Lutheran Church and her burial in the Lambertsville Cemetery. Neighbors believe nearly 1,000 people filed through the parlors of her home earlier to look upon her placid face, with no vestige of the horrors that took her life. The hush of death pervaded the entire assemblage. Finally, more than 5 weeks after the murder, a warrant was issued, and in the evening of Monday, December 17, 1906, sheriff's deputies arrested Mrs. Stauffer's son-in-law, John H. Miller, at his home about 2 miles northeast of Shanksville Borough. The all-male jury was selected and the actual trial commenced on Monday, May 27, 1907. Women did not have the right to serve as jurors until well after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, June 24, 1919, giving women the right to vote. With all the attention the press created with their coverage of the Stauffer murder, hotels were filled to capacity during the trial. Jury members had to sleep on cots in the courtroom. Can you imagine how uncomfortable the jurors must have felt, let alone with no privacy? Tuesday, June 4, 1907, the trial ended by Somerset County Judge Francis Kuser telling the jury to find John Miller not guilty due to lack of evidence. Let me put you in the jury box and look at what we know, and you can draw your own conclusions. The accused definitely knew their way around the Stauffer property and interior of the house. then securing a ladder from a shed and placing it at a bedroom window where they knew no one was sleeping to possibly hear their entry. Also, why didn't the killer bring his own weapon? Instead, he chose to take a hammer from a shed. Was this premeditated also? A blacksmith hammer was found in the yard, tossed there by the fleeing perpetrator. Dr. Friedlein fitted the tapered end of the hammer into the head wound, confirming it was the instrument of death. Also, Grace Ullman heard her grandmother say to the intruder, "I know you. How familiar can you get?" This was not a stranger. Mrs. Stauffer had $80 in her dresser drawer, and nothing was disturbed in the house. This was not a sign of robbery, but of a cold, meditated killing. A bottle of chloroform was found in the front yard. The bottle had a label with Dr. Baker, Stoystown, Pennsylvania, printed on it. Dr. Lowther testified it was the same bottle presented to him at a drugstore by the accused John Miller on November 5th, to be filled with 3 ounces of chloroform, only 3 days before the murder. The cork and handkerchief that was used to apply the chloroform to Grace Ullman's face was found in her bedroom. The same day John Miller bought the chloroform, he was at the Somerset County Courthouse and asked Pathonetary Charles Schaefer to show him the will of his late father-in-law, William Stauffer, which he read very carefully. Could it be John Miller was disappointed in the apportionment of his wife Kate's share? In the event of Mrs. Stauffer's death, Catherine's share would be divided between Grace and John Ullman. There is no mention of Mr. Stauffer's 3 sons to his first wife in the will. The reason is one son, William, passed away in 1862, and John fell from a roof and died. I don't know what happened to the 3rd son, Harry, but his name does not appear on the will. Mr. Stauffer's will stated that Catherine was to settle the estate within 5 years of his death in 1903. Some of the heirs were constantly after Catherine to settle the estate sooner. A settlement document was given to her to sign a few months before, but she refused to sign. District Attorney Myers told the jury that Mrs. Stauffer held an $85 note against John Miller. The DA also noted that John Miller coaxed Grace and John Ullman to secretly secure the note and place it in his possession. Don't forget about the cut window blind that left an exact print of the killer's gumshoe. The same gumshoe tracks were followed from the house and along the old road leading to present-day Route 30, and then lost. Then in a diametrical direction, a fast-moving 2-horse hitched buggy passed the William Spangler farm shortly after the Ullman children arrived, telling the Spanglers of their terrifying flight from an intruder at the Stauffer house. Apparently 2 people may be involved with the murder. The person that entered the upstairs window had gone downstairs after choking Grace Ullman. Did he go down the stairs to open the door for the real killer, who held the weapon of destruction upon Mrs. Stauffer? Or did he merely go downstairs to light a lamp? We will never know the involvement of the second actor. Why didn't Mrs. Stauffer's son, Sheridan Fickus, from her first marriage, stay with her the night of the murder? He was up from Johnstown and stayed several miles away, east of Buckstown, along present-day Route 30 at the residence of Ellsworth Lang. Sheridan Fickus filed a warrant for the arrest of G.H. Walker as the killer of Mrs. Stauffer. This was the day after John Miller was arrested. Neighbors felt that it was an attempt on Sheridan Fickus' part to remove the guilt from John Miller. To top it all off, before the dust of the trial had settled, John Miller and Sheridan Fickus were appointed administrators of Catherine Stauffer's estate. Why Somerset County law enforcement officers dropped the search cold After the court proceedings of John Miller ended, we will never know. One newspaper writer was told the county did not want to spend the money on outside professional investigative assistance. Did the financial burden of the newly completed courthouse tip the scale of justice? I realize many of the things I told you may be considered circumstantial evidence. Guilty or not guilty, you decide. One thing is for sure, the day of judgment will reveal the true identity of Catherine Stauffer's murder. I rest my case. Thank you for watching this episode of Tales of the Alleghenies. Please subscribe and tell us what you think in the comments below.